Welcome to today's webinar, From Broadcast to Dialogue, How Higher Ed Leaders Are Leveling Up Student Communication. I'm excited to explore how institutions are transforming student engagement through more responsive, personalized communication. As attendees continue to join our webcast, please share in the chat where you're connecting from today and what role you play at your institution. To start us off, I have a few quick housekeeping notes. Feel free to submit questions anytime throughout the presentation using the Q&A box. We'll address them at the end of our discussion. You'll receive the webinar recording and related resources via email later, including the full survey report. Let's get started. Today, we're exploring what higher ed leaders across North America told us about their communications practice throughout the student life cycle. These findings come from a joint survey by Mongoose and Higher Ed Dive's Studio ID. They reveal both current practices and untapped opportunities to elevate student experiences and perceptions. We'll review a handful of select findings during our time together, and you can access the full report later. Joining us today are two Mongoose experts. They'll add context and nuance to the survey findings, and based on data analysis of millions of student text and chat conversations at institutions across the U.S. Let's meet them. Dave Marshall is the founder and CEO of Mongoose, a communications platform used by more than 30,000 higher ed professionals to foster dynamic conversations with students. Dave's work is guided by a philosophy of removing the unnecessary and designing systems that deepen human connection. Josie Sutcliffe serves as Vice President of Marketing for Mongoose and brings us rich experience at the intersection of tech and higher ed. She shares Dave's passion for delivering empathy at scale. Thank you both for your time today. Our first survey finding reflects a shift from broadcasting one-way announcements to fostering two-way conversations. Most surveyed institutions have begun this transition. We see that 57% now enable two-way conversations at scale, where staff can engage in ongoing dialogue with students. 30% have also implemented real-time response capabilities, allowing students to receive immediate answers when they text or chat with their school's digital channels. So, Dave, do these numbers reflect what you're seeing in your work across nearly 1,000 colleges and universities?
Yes, they absolutely do. And there is nuance to some of these categories here. So I'd like to talk about two-way communication with limitations and two-way communication. Obviously, I would think that everyone would agree that it's obvious having two-way communication is ideal so that you're able to have conversations with students. Many of our clients have a CRM that has a texting capability within it. In most of them, it is to varying degrees possible to have a two-way conversation depending on your CRM. But where the limitations comes in is it's often very challenging to have a fluid, genuine conversation with the students. So we've found that CRMs are excellent for pre-planning comm plans and for scheduling text to go out when a certain action would happen. They're great for that. They're great for, notifications and reminders. But where the challenge comes in is when the student writes back and they're excited to have a conversation about whatever is on their mind, that tends to be where it breaks down. It's often very challenging for staff to even be notified when a student gets back, or if they do, they have to get back to their desk and log into the CRM and find that contact record and find the activity log and parse out text activities from all the other ones, and then hopefully send the message. And so the magic comes in that when you're able to have a conversation rhythm that students appreciate and they get into it and they're highly personal. Using a CRM, while we can do two-way conversations, can be limited in the ability to have real conversations. And often we've seen our clients prior to using our platform end up ghosting the students. So an automated text would go out and the student might write back, "Oh, I'm so concerned about this," or "I'm anxious about that." And the student never hears back, which is the opposite of what every institution wants. They want the student to feel valued and a sense of belonging and that someone has their back and they're able to get their issues resolved. So I just wanted to lead into the nuance of the two way.
Right, right. Love that. And Josie, what would you add? Could you share some examples of the measurable gains that you may have seen from two-way student communications that help can enable for colleges and universities?
Yes, happy to. So earlier this year at Mongoose, we did a benchmark report where we looked at millions of text conversations that had gone on between institutions and their students in the 2023-2024 academic year. And what we were looking for were sort of the trends in those communications. What was the sentiment or emotions? What are the topics being covered? What do resolution rates look like? And then also how different types of communications linked to student outcomes. So, for example, what we found in the data was that if you sent no text, as kind of the baseline, if you sent a one-way notification text, and then we compared that to more of if you engaged a student in a two-way conversation of the type that Dave was referring to, where it's very fluid back and forth. And what we found was that students who receive one-way notifications are 3.7 times more likely to take key enrollment actions, as one example, compared to receiving no communication at all or no text message at all. But if you replace that with two-way communications, that number doubles to 7.5 times. And even more specifically, when we looked at completed application rates, we found that students that were receiving kind of one-way broadcast text were 7 times more likely to complete their applications, compared to receiving no text at all. However, students that engaged in two-way conversations through text with their institution, with their advisor, and so on, they were actually seeing 34 times greater application completion rates. So you can see the value of being able to engage students in these two-way dialogues that are personalized and empathetic, kind of natural ways that two humans should be communicating with each other. And we're really seeing that sort of strong engagement holds true across the student journey. Whether it's at an enrollment phase or later on through student success type conversations, right through to alumni relations. The two-way communications are unlocking that greater engagement that's really driving the outcomes that institutions are really focused on, tied into making sure that students are successful in all the steps that they're taking through their journey.
Right. That's some powerful data there. Okay, so looking at the survey, as institutions transition to two-way student communication, they're also embracing a new ecosystem of digital channels, which brings us to the next finding. Our survey asked which digital channels higher ed leaders currently use for student communications, and then we asked them to rate their effectiveness. Most respondents told us that they use a mix of various digital channels to communicate with students and alumni. And those channels include email, texting, WhatsApp, social media direct messages, and more. Now, what's particularly interesting is how mobile first instant messaging options are gaining traction. So, Josie, from your observations, how are student preferences reshaping communications technology practices in higher ed?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think if anyone pictures a student today, they picture them using their phone. So that's sort of the instant gratification channels where you can get the message very easily and you can have that easier two-way correspondence, whereas the traditional channels like email is a much slower approach. I think many students don't even check their email on a daily basis anymore. And so that's, the institutions that we partner with are also experiencing is the students that they're working with are much more likely to be looking at their phone than they are, say, email on a laptop. Some of them, depending on the circumstance, may not even have a laptop that they have regular access to. And so access to texting and social channels becomes much more important and valuable, and really supports also that sort of two-way human interaction experience. And so when you think about colleges and universities today, to be effective, they really have to meet students where they are. Email might have its place, time and place and use, but that's not the main place where students are going to want to communicate or the communications are going to be the most effective with students. And so all of this translates into having this mobile first approach and supporting things like texting.
Great, great. Dave, what else stands out to you in these survey responses?
What stands out to me, I would say, is the email that the respondents had a perception of that a lot of students, they find it effective with a lot of students. And with our clients, we have seen that email is a required component. There are times you have to check your email if you're joining a new website or registering or resetting your password and those kinds of things. Other than those kinds of things, we've seen that texting and WhatsApp to the student be much more effective. And they could also be effective to letting the student know to go check their email. That really works too. So there was a research that was done by DCDX, which is a research firm focused on Gen Z, and they ranked the top 10 apps used by Gen Z by the amount of time they spend on these apps per week. And out of the top 10 apps, email was not even in the top 10. And most of the apps allowed for some communication. So texting was right near the top. WhatsApp. And then we have the Instagram, which you have conversations on that with your friends, and social media apps where they message too, because it's instant and it's real time and it's easy. And that's the behavior that is going to work best to engage those students.
Right, right. So I'm wondering, how does AI play into these capabilities, and what are your clients experiencing with AI assisted communication?
We are fortunate to be alive at this time for higher ed communication and how much AI is going to be able to help. And I'd like to explain why. So Mongoose has been around for over 10 years now, and our clients have sent back and forth hundreds of millions of conversations. And that we, with AI, not only can we look at what's happening in those conversations as far as what are the topics that we're talking about and was a resolution met, but also AI is conversational for the student. So there are times that students absolutely need to have or want to have a genuine conversation with a human. There's a real feeling there. And there's a lot of times that they just need to get their question answered. And so if there's an AI chatbot or an AI texting responder, we found it really works well to be very, very clear. This is an AI. Um, and we also find it to be helpful for our clients to be clear when it's a human too. Like, I'm a real human, you could ask, right? But then you have this 24/7 conversational platform available to help students. That is just wild and a huge leap forward.
Josie, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I'll go into a little bit deeper is this idea around operational efficiency that comes from bringing AI in. So, some of the results that we've seen, and this was part of the benchmark report that I shared or mentioned earlier, is that institutions that are using our platform, for example, for AI assisted chat, are seeing an 83% engagement with students that use that chat to try to answer their questions. And 82% of inquiries that are coming in through chat are being successfully resolved without any kind of human intervention. So those are kind of all those routine questions that if you didn't have this AI assisted chat, staff would be needing to answer. And the side note here is what you always want to make sure if you're using an AI assisted tool is that there is a path to escalate to a human that is very easy and frictionless for students. But if you can actually be resolving 80% of inquiries using a chat 24/7, at nighttime when your staff may not even be available, the impact can be exceptional. And it also delivers that incredible sort of force multiplier effect to teams that, let's face it, in higher ed, as in many industries, there's increasing pressure to try to do more with the same staff, try to support students without growing your teams. And having AI-based tools can really assist with that. I mean, we have customers that have told us that their staff would revolt if they took away Mongoose because it's been such a force multiplier for them. And there's also the added piece where AI can also really help shape answers for students. So if you think about it within the context of enrollment, for example, you might have advisors who or counselors who are newer in their role and don't always know the best way to shape an answer to a student asking a really specific question. And you can use AI, especially AI that's being trained on like tens of millions of conversations, to really inform and help shape how to best and most effectively respond to questions that are coming in from students.
Great. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to our next finding. The survey report signals a growing appetite for data-driven decision-making and a growing maturity in how institutions are using student communication insights. For example, 43% of respondents say that they base business or operational decisions primarily on quantitative student communication data today. 30% use a mix of quantitative data and qualitative insights like gut feelings or personal experience. Nearly 95%, nearly all, say that they have at least some insight into the topic students discuss through automated or AI-powered text or chat. I'll ask you both, Dave and Josie, what can we glean from those results?
Decision making does need to be, a mix of both. Okay. And I want to get back to how AI can really help you here. If an institution is using a communications platform that allows to have conversations, what is in those conversations and what can be revealed from them can be extremely valuable, like a treasure trove of helpful information. So prior to AI, we were only able to know things like how many texts went out, or what was the reply rate, and just very basic things. And we have seen with our clients how valuable our clients report these conversations are. But now with AI, we are able to have, to unlock conversation intelligence. So conversation, like what is that part of it? That is the dynamic back and forth exchanges between a staff member and a student. That's the conversation part. And then the intelligence part is the ability for AI to discover, understand, and reveal what is happening within those conversations. And that's where all the real gold is. You're able to now see how any cohort of students that you would like to look at, how they're feeling about certain topics, which is incredible, because prior to AI, that was a black box. You had to rely on anecdotal evidence from staff and hearing information from students. And you no longer need to just rely on structured data. And what I mean there is like a survey. How are you feeling on a scale from 1 to 5? I feel like a 3. That was what we all had to rely on for years. But now with AI, we can examine these unstructured conversations where the student might have been venting or reflecting, or it might have been appreciative or confused or frustrated about all these different topics. And we have really easy access to all of that information. And oh, by the way, we can reach back out to these students because we have high touch tools to have conversations about the topic that they felt a certain way about. So this is a watershed time for higher ed's ability to understand how students are feeling and then how to help them through that.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Can't really emphasize it enough. It is really this watershed moment, and having the level of visibility into student conversations that institutions can now have is truly transformational. And you can imagine, even, being a president at an institution, and being able to look at what the sentiment and emotions are of the conversations that are happening with students across all the different areas of the student life cycle, and being able to connect those sentiments to resolution rates of topics that are being discussed, and also to identify where there's more frustration taking place. So obviously it's great if you look and you see that the main sentiment is joy or positive. But, as a leader of an institution, you also want to really narrow down and focus on those areas where sentiment isn't as positive and perhaps there's more frustration or happening. And looking at, okay, well, if we dig into this and we say, look at where there's more frustration happening in conversations, what sort of things can what initiatives can we put in place? What interventions can we trigger to really help turn that around? And we looked at this data in our benchmark report and found that, for example, maybe not that surprising, but one of the big frustration points is around students trying to figure out how to access their portals, when they're new students coming into an institution. So that immediately would give an institution an idea of, okay, well, now we really should be looking at what are those processes around that and how can we improve them for students to make it easier. So you really go from this place of operating somewhat without sight into any of these insights, relying purely on gut and intuition and sort of these lagging metrics, waiting to see conversion rates might happen over a long period of time. Instead, you get this really real-time view into how students are feeling, how topics there are or aren't being resolved, what the trending topics are, so that you can make much better decisions. And this is all powered by AI-driven platforms like Mongoose, really enable this in new ways, and also help institutions really think about how they can scale empathy across these digital communication channels.
Right. Right. Thank you. Let's move on to the next bit, which is about success metrics. The survey asked higher ed leaders how they're gauging the effectiveness and ROI of student communications. Response, deliverability, and click through rates are the performance metrics tracked by most respondents. When it comes to measuring ROI, however, respondents prioritize student response slash compliance rates, followed by cost saving. Dave, would you say that there's a common thread or emerging best practice that you've observed among Mongoose clients?
Yes, for years. So let's just say prior to AI, our clients had to rely on metrics like quantity of text going out. What is the average reply rate? What is the average number of replies we got back from a student? How long does it take a staff to get back to a student? What is the opt-out rate? There was a lot of those metrics that would allow them to kind of, put a finger in the air to kind of, am I doing a good job engaging our students? And with conversation intelligence and with AI, we have a whole new set of information that helps guide us to resolving more issues with our students. So the gold standard metric that we've seen our clients use is resolution rate. So what is that? If there's a conversation happening, was the conversation resolved? So that doesn't mean like, did we not, who sent the last text in the conversation, right? Because if you're having a conversation with a student and the student says, hey, I'm frustrated about this, or I'm confused about this, and there's a back and forth, the last message from the student might be, thanks a lot, I appreciate it. And was that conversation resolved? Yes. Who was the last person to send the text? It was the student. With AI, we can now look at, on a conversation by conversation basis, what conversations are resolved, and maybe more importantly, what ones are unresolved. When we implemented this solution, we were finding that sometimes 40% of conversations were unresolved, sometimes 30% of conversations, which is so scary. Once our clients could see that and have visibility into it, they're able to efficiently resolve so many more conversations. And then there's that intangible that the student feels more connected and they feel more confident and they can focus on the things that really matter. So from a metric perspective, resolution rate is the gold standard. And we've seen that its effect on things like enrollment yield, app completion, retention, persistence, graduation rate, all of these things. The higher you can get the resolution rate, the more effective you'll be at all of those things.
Right. All right. So next, we'll go to the next item. Next, we asked higher ed leaders which student communications capabilities would significantly impact their ability to perform their jobs. Most respondents told us two-way communications and personalized support at scale would have the most impact. Josie, this is consistent with what we've seen and discussed so far. What's your takeaway from these numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. This very much reinforces what we're seeing, which is this movement that Dave touched on earlier, the shift from just thinking about text as kind of a one-way notification communication to a way to actually enable this two-way conversation with students. So we already talked about how students are more likely to spend time on their texting or WhatsApp apps than in email. Email certainly is not a great way of having a two-way conversation with someone. And so because if institutions want to engage students in that back and forth dynamic conversation, the most natural way for them to do it is going to be at scale anyway, is going to be through something like text or WhatsApp. And so, people looking for these capabilities makes a lot of sense, is certainly what our experience has been. Now, what was interesting is when I went with the team and looked through the results or outcomes of this survey, and we also had some open-ended questions that you don't see here on the slide, but where we asked about what outcomes leaders were expecting from improving their student communications and enabling that kind of two-way back and forth conversation. And the common themes that we saw were around speeding up resolution. So to Dave's point, the criticality of knowing when you're resolving topics for students and being able to resolve those really quickly was something that came up quite a bit. And also gaining a deeper understanding of student needs. So again, trying to use this two-way communications platform, not just as a way to get information out, but to also really understand what students are looking for, what help they need, what they might be feeling worried or uncertain about, that then the institution can turn around and support them with to really help drive all of those student success types and metrics. So really all I think what we see is this continued movement towards having personalized, empathetic conversations with students at scale in a way that makes students feel seen and heard and valued, but also engages them and makes sure that they're have this connection with institutions. I mean, we spend quite a bit of time talking with presidents and vice presidents of universities and colleges. And in some of those, one of the themes I think we've seen in those conversations just over the last year has been this reality is that the way that students experience your institution is the truth. And so, being able to have these two-way conversations with students in the format that students actually want to use, and to be able to use it to understand how students are feeling, what support they need, where things aren't working for students is really going to give students that better experience with their institution, which will undoubtedly lead to better student outcomes. Dave, did you want to add anything?
I think that I would add the potential ROI and efficiency gains are so substantial when institutions enable AI supported conversations and the intelligence behind those conversations. When you think about app completion rates and the dramatic increase there, the dramatic increase in enrollment, the increase in retention and persistence, even if we're not talking about just doing the right thing for the students, purely from an ROI perspective, this technology pays for itself in months. It's just from a fiscal point of view, it's just the efficiencies and service that it provides are substantial.
Interesting point. So I imagine that using these capabilities to their fullest requires integrating student communication systems across the institution or educational system, which is a challenge for some, I would think. The survey showed a nearly even split between institutions with integrated student communications at 44% and those where departments operate their own separate systems at 46%. What insights or guidance can you share for unifying student communication?
Well, one insight that I could share is that it's extremely important for institutions to have empathy for the student and the journey that the student's on. By their nature, colleges and universities are very siloed. Often, if we're working with 5 to 10 teams at one school, there's people on those teams that have never even met each other that are on the other teams. They use their own vernacular. They have their own goals. They have their own technology system. And from students, and they have their own communication tools that come with it. One's going to be email only, but you can't reply. Well, the other one's text, but it comes from a short code and you can't write back. And the other one's text, but it's two-way, but there's a nuance there. The other one's using AI, right? And so these poor students have to navigate this world, especially for a first-gen student, where they don't know what the difference between the bursar, their advisor, student success coach is different than the advisor. What about the wellness team and the counseling center? Like, where do I go? You're asking them to navigate this like labyrinth that they need to get through. So unifying the communication across teams is really essential for having a smooth student journey. Our most successful clients use it across the student life cycle, so that there's a consistent experience for the student all the way from when they're a prospective student to when they're an applicant, to when they enroll, and then they're a current student, and they always have a lifeline to ask questions and to get their problem solved. So that's why conversation intelligence works best and really should work across the entire life cycle rather than just for one team.
Yeah, I'll double down on that. I think what we see in most communities or most colleges and universities is that they tend to be quite matrixed organizations. So you have a lot of separated departments that are supporting different aspects of the student life cycle, but there is a ton of crossover between them. And so, one of the things I know Mongoose has been really focused on from the beginning is making sure that despite that complexity within an institution, the messaging can be supported seamlessly across all of those different groups. And, there are even concepts of like having a shared inbox for certain teams, being able to understand how to share information across those different areas to make things simpler for students ultimately. Another point I wanted to make was, I know the survey also asked leaders about, what barriers were keeping them from unifying communication platforms across kind of at the campus-wide, institution-wide level. And the responses that we saw really indicated that leaders were thinking that the technology integrations were just too complex. They were too expensive. They were too labor intensive. The good news is that's not necessarily the case for many technologies today. Depending on the conversation intelligence platform, institution adopts, a platform like Mongoose is very much designed to be integrated easily, cost effectively, with all of the different systems that are being used across all the different departments and the student life cycle and so on. Whether it's a student information system or a CRM or a system that's being used for fundraising or alumni relations or your learning management system. There's so many different tools where, you think there would be value in integrating it with your conversation intelligence platform. So, it's certainly something to look into when you're evaluating a system or a platform to use. But in many cases, the integration barrier isn't there like it would have been in the past.
Well, thank you for those insights, Josie and Dave. We're nearing the end of our session. Any closing thoughts before we turn to audience questions? For example, what should our audience keep in mind as they assess their student communications and consider next steps?
I would say we can all agree that higher ed is really being challenged now. There's the theft fiasco of a couple of years ago that certainly didn't help the it's no longer a foregone conclusion that students are going to be going to college in the first place. Staff turnover, it has been really high. So all of these forces are real, and it's a real challenge. And I'm going to go back to what I said, I think at the start. This is an incredible time to be working in higher ed to engage students. Higher ed is going through a massive transformation as to how they're able to demonstrate value through every interaction with the student, and doing so with fewer resources, fewer staff, and higher turnover, and they have to get onboarded. Technology can be your biggest asset here. It's incredible. So what we're seeing with our most successful clients, and then we look at schools that are really struggling with how they are engaging students. There is a growing divide between the institutions that are, clinging to the old ways of doing things with broadcast messaging, or just say this, we only use email. It's up to them. They need to check it. Well, that's an outdated posture, right? And it's not going to allow your institution to be successful or the student. It's not good for either. So, and then you contrast that with the students that are really leaning into AI, and for staff efficiencies and better service and better conversation. The strategic question isn't like, should you invest in advancing your student communication? It's how soon can you scale that up before the other options for students, your competition, before they do. There's some real opportunity that's out there now.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, I think what we're seeing, certainly what the data is showing us, is that introducing a conversation intelligence platform can drive such incredible outcomes in such a short period of time that you just can't achieve with traditional CRMs and that sort of thing, just simply by enabling the two-way conversations that are so empathetic, at scale, leveraging AI to automate responses in a human way where you can, but then also getting access to all of those incredible insights into what's working and what's not, and how students are feeling, and topic resolution and that sort of thing. That can make such a difference in an institution. And, one thing I wanted to just mention is that, we just recently released a definitive guide to conversation intelligence that's available on our website, ungated. So anybody can go in and download that. That really explains this idea of conversation intelligence, which is a relatively new one, in a much more detailed way, and talks about if you are getting to that step of evaluating platforms or thinking about introducing something like this at your institution, you can go through it and really get an idea into the type of capabilities you should be looking for. And of course, one thing you should be looking for is the experience of your peer institutions. What systems are they using that they've had this kind of solid long-term experience and track record with. And learning from their experiences as well.
Great. Well, thanks again, Dave and Josie. And now let's take some Q&As. Thanks to our viewers who have submitted questions. You're welcome to keep those questions coming. If we're unable to cover it in the next few minutes, you'll receive an answer via email. Let's start with the first one. What level of IT support is typically needed to implement and maintain an integrated communications platform like Mongoose?
I can take that one. I'd first like to acknowledge that many vendors in higher ed say, oh, the integration is seamless, and that it gets handed in the lap of the IT folk, and it's totally not. And so I would say, as it relates to Mongoose, we have made that process. I mean, I've been working in higher ed on the vendor side with integration to third-party systems for 27 years now. and it's one of our strengths, that depending on if we're going to integrate with the ERP or the CRMs or both, or the fundraising product, many integrations are as easy as point and click. And I'm going to bring these fields over and do it every night or do it in real time. And others are just so straightforward that IT, it often is the department on campus that we usually don't come in through IT, but they want us to expand because all the tools are so easy for them. And it's better to have one platform that you can consolidate on than having every team use their own independent tool that's not integrated with everything else that's happening.
Great. Okay, here's the next one. We talked about AI before. We got, not surprising, got another question about it. How do you see AI transforming student communications in the next few years? And how should colleges, universities be preparing now?
I'm going to separate the academically focused AI conversation. That's a whole nother conversation, I guess. But as far as how it relates to student communication, I guess I gave one tip earlier about when it's AI, just be very clear. This is an AI bot. And when it's a human, just be very clear. This is a human, so that there's less tension and confusion there. I would say, work with partners that help you be future proof. Like, ask potential partners who you're going to use, what is your roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years? And how do you see it reshaping the industry? And partner with those folks. Like I use the word watershed earlier, and I really mean it, that AI unlocks efficiency and better service and better insights like we've never even dreamed of. So that's how I see it transforming.
Perfect. Great. Here's another one. What would you recommend as the first step for an institution looking to modernize its student communication?
I can take that one. So, I think with anything like this, any topic like this, the first place to start is to think about your objective and your strategic objective, and your goals. So what is it that you're trying to achieve by undertaking this modernization? And you might find that it's something tied specifically to student success, or it might be tied to some enrollment goals, or some bigger strategies at your institution just around creating an overarching better student experience, for example. And once you've clarified those objectives or goals, then you can get into, okay, well, how do we achieve those? And that's where thinking about, okay, well, what capabilities do we want to have comes into play. And I mentioned earlier, the definitive guide to conversation intelligence that we have on our website could help with this, because it can give you kind of a starting point of the types of things you could be thinking about. But one great example would be, well, if you want to increase, for example, completion rates for students, you might realize that, okay, to get there based on the research, we want to have a communications solution that allows us to engage students in two-way conversations where we're not limited to just kind of one direction kind of text notifications. So that's where you'll start to then identify what are the capabilities that are important to you. Another thing to think about is who are the groups that are going to be interested or have a stake in using the platform that you put in place. So certainly when Mongoose starts working with institutions, we can come in from many different angles. It might be that we're working with the enrollment team, or we might be working with student advising team, or student advancement down the road. It could be all these different areas that are starting the conversation with us. But the reality is often it ends up being a number of different functional areas that are going to be using our platform. And so thinking that through up front and then finding champions within those different groups and bringing them together early on can be really helpful, just to increase your buy-in and increase usage. And also, of course, like the ROI you're going to get from you put in place.
Great. All right. Here's another one. How are institutions handling the privacy and data security aspects of AI powered communications? And how do we keep AI from hallucinating and giving incorrect information?
Yes, this is great. The institutions over my years of working with them have gotten really good about being tight on security, on privacy. The vendor's not going to be introduced into the school if they're not SOC 2 compliant and FERPA compliant, and all of those things are just, you know, you have to have that. And so your IT teams will make sure that whoever you work with has those things. And schools have gotten really good at that. They will also make sure that student conversations are not being used to train an external model, right? Is it like, are these conversations being used to train the chat GPT thing, right? So that's just, it has to be secure within your institution. The data is anonymized from a privacy perspective, and that's just that is a requirement. And schools are really good now at being, let's see your SOC 2 reports, see your HECMAT report, everything's standardized, and they've gotten really good at it. Now, the other part of the question was hallucinating. So what's super scary is if we're using AI to help us with the actual conversations, or there's an AI chatbot, or if the AI, creates a suggested reply for the staff member or replies on behalf of the staff member, being certain that it's not going to hallucinate and give information that's not correct is essential. So that goes to finding, if you have AI assisted conversations, making sure that the AI model that the vendor's using is only trained on very institutional specific data and isn't be able to use data from the rest of the internet. That really puts the clamps down on, you would rather have the model say, I don't have that information, rather than just make it up, because the most likely predictive thing to say is this, and that's not true. So clients, schools should just ensure that the model is only trained on their institutional specific data.
Great. Okay. Here's a new question. Can you share examples of how some institutions are using conversation intelligence to identify and resolve specific student pain points?
Yeah, there's it's like an endless set of examples, but I'll try to maybe hit on a few that are either we hear a lot or maybe more unique, so could be interesting for people to hear about. So one, working with one of our community college partners, they had a challenge where they realized that often the time of day when students were seeking information was after hours, and they couldn't staff, like 11 p.m. midnight type hours. And so they used Mongoose to put AI assisted chat on their relevant web pages. They have kind of a one-stop shop site. And they found that over 80% of inquiries are now getting resolved without any human intervention using that chat. And then they have, with the chat, there is the way to request or to kind of trigger need for human. And so when their staff start the next morning, they can see what conversations took place that over the night and identify if there are any that actually need a human follow-up. So that's been really powerful for them. Another example, which is maybe a little bit, not as obvious one, is, we have some institutions that are using Mongoose to communicate with students on housing related topics. So not only setting up students with housing, but then through the year, their housing team are using it to engage with students and about what's going on, anything they should know about residents, respond to questions they might be getting about issues or, whatever it might be. And that's one of the teams that, said to the person that manages Mongoose, their institution, like, do not ever take this away from us. It's been such a game changer for us. I can only imagine all the questions that come up related to housing. Another example is around enrollment. That's one of the most common use cases for Mongoose, is really using the two-way conversations through text and WhatsApp to engage with prospective students, answer all their questions, and then take them through the process to get them, to sort of convert from being an interested prospective student to actually being an enrolled student. And there are so many details that come up through that process. And the outcomes there have been amazing in terms of the increase in enrollment yield, for example, for so many institutions that add this means of communicating with students to their kind of existing set of communications. And perhaps the last example I'll touch on, because I could just keep talking about this for a really long time, but the last example I'll touch on has to do with first-year students. So Mongoose is often used for student success type use cases. One of them is often around focusing on specifically that first-year group of students that needs perhaps more support than students do once they've been through it the first year. And so there again, we've seen incredible outcomes in terms of helping students successfully complete their first year and then also return and not melt away over the summer after that first year. One of our customers, for example, retained 98% of students that engaged with them through the Mongoose platform, which I think is an amazing accomplishment.
Definitely. All right. I think we've got time for one more question. How are institutions balancing automation with maintaining that authentic human touch in their communications? And are there certain interactions that should never be automated?
Yeah, this is more art than science here, and it can be pretty simple. I've said this a few times. If AI is having the conversation, so if the student's having a conversation with an AI bot, be it via web chat, be it via texting, via WhatsApp or whatever, always being extremely transparent and obvious. AI bot, parentheses, and then what the bot says, right? So that you're just always being really, really clear that this is an AI bot. That's a different section in the student's brain. Like, okay, this is an AI bot. I'm gonna talk to it like this. And that doesn't mean that the AI bot can't have a personality, but it just needs to be very, very clear that this is an AI bot. Then when it is an actual human having these conversations, really clear that this is a human having these conversations. And and then there's this gray area in the middle where, with our product anyway, our clients have, like, while you're having a conversation with a student, there's a generate an AI response recommendation form. And often that response is intentionally highly empathetic, that allows the students for their feelings to be validated and be very, very clear what the action item is. And so that actually helps. And the human will read it, maybe change a few things. That actually helps the human be more human rather than, be more empathetic and more kind and more caring and more thoughtful and more thorough, more clear, all these beautiful things. And what is true for one student might not be true for the other. So one might be totally fine talking to the AI bot about whatever. The next student might be like, I need to talk to a human here. I just really do. And also from institution to institution, that where they draw that line isn't always the same. Some institutions are smaller in size and they pride themselves on the personal relationships that they form, and they have the resources to do that. Others, very large 4-year private, simply can't do that, can't handle that scale. So the takeaway here, best practice, always be explicit. What is an AI conversation and what is a human-based one?
Perfect. Great. Well, with that, we have come to the end of the webinar. This webinar will be available on demand if you wish to review it or share it with your team. And thank you once again to our speakers, Dave and Josie, and thank you all for joining us today. See you next time.